Okay, hello. So today we're going to be demoing a little bit of TypeScript. So this is the first project that I've done in TypeScript, which is mostly a learning exercise for me, just to learn how to interact with APIs. Um, and so yeah, we'll start off by just demoing the code here. So we've got so TypeScript is compiled down into JavaScript. So if we run this tsc command in our terminal here, then it'll compile this JavaScript file, right? Which is then what actually can run. You can't just natively run TypeScript. So we've got this function or this file here, this JavaScript file that we can then run. This could also be put into a web browser, right? Obviously. If we had an HTML file, we could have this script run in a script there. But I just wrote this out in a console just so I could get familiar with how the API and API calls and JSON objects work. So we'll hit run here. So we give it a location, a city for it to get the forecast for. So if I were to put in Washington, let's do Mesa. Then it'll return this information here that I specified. So the API returns a lot more than this, but this is just something that I specified that I felt like was the most important things for the user to see. And then you can enter into another city, right? So if I were to put in Portland or whatever, then it will give me that data there, right? And then I can just type exit to be done, and it'll terminate the program. So essentially how this works is we've got so this is using the OpenWeather API. So I've got an API key here. It'll import that, and then we've got a couple of functions here. So the first one is to actually get the weather data, which is what actually calls the API and returns a JSON object. So it'll call this API with the location that we give it, and the API key, and then returns that in imperial units, right? So then that response is then mapped to a JSON object, and then we call this display data function and pass it that JSON object, which it then displays. So we've got a little bit of this is just an interface for the user input, right? And then we've got this is the actual function that gets the user input, right? So these got these promises, right, which is something that was new for me in JavaScript, right? That is essentially something that when it's fulfilled, right, or it's resolved, it'll do one thing. You design what it does when it is resolved, or it's successful, right? Or then you do another thing when it fails or when it's rejected, right? So this one, right, is a promise for the read line, right? So it'll read the user input after we prompt it with this query, and then it'll give once we actually resolve that, right? The user types in something and presses enter, then it'll call back the string as the location that it resolves, right? So then when we go to the main function, right, it'll have the user input be this await, right? This asynchronous function call, so that when this does resolve, right, it'll return the string, and then it'll set this user input string to that value. So it can run, and then as soon as it's resolved, then it'll go back, right? Same thing with this get weather data, right? That's an asynchronous function. So once it actually has completed the API fetch, then it'll return the object, right? And then it'll do what it needs to do, right? So yeah, that was that's essentially what we've got here. There's a couple other little things in here, right? This is just the formatting for the JSON object, right? So when we display the data, we'll pass it a JSON object, and then it goes through and iterates through this. So initially I had done this with just displaying everything, would just iterate through every key in the object, so I could kind of see what the data was that the API was returning. But now that I kind of boiled it down just to a couple things that I thought were important. So it just grabs these things from the JSON, and then it'll display that. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed this. This was done with, like I said, TypeScript, the OpenWeather API, and then you install Node.js for the TypeScript compiler here. Yeah, hope you enjoyed.